Hi everyone, hope you guys are doing well. This is James from Divine Crochet. Welcome to my channel. For today's video, I thought I'd teach you guys how to graphic crochet whilst keeping two good sides. I've graphic crocheted for quite some time and I've actually already shared a tutorial on how to graphic crochet. The method that I shared in that video is very beginner friendly, but it's definitely not the best way to graphic crochet. I used a technique called fair isle crochet, which is where you carry along the colour whilst changing your colours, and this leaves you with a good and bad side. Now this definitely isn't the end of the world, but this will make your panel a little bit thicker. You'll end up using a little bit more yarn, and obviously you have a good and a bad side for this panel. So for today's video, I thought I'd share with you everything that I've learned on how to do a different technique, which is called Intarsia, which I'm not sure that I'm saying it right, so I'm just going to put it up here, which is basically a method where you use different balls of yarn to create different areas in your graphic. Not only does this mean that your panel will be thinner and you'll use less yarn, but also you'll have two good sides for you to be able to work with. And as someone who loves to crochet garments, this technique is actually a lot nicer to use because it's less bulky, so it makes your clothes look a lot nicer. Not only will I teach you guys this technique, but I'll definitely share all of my tips and tricks that I've learned about doing this technique, such as how to do this technique without tangling all of your yarn, which I had the biggest trouble with, but I finally figured it out, so I'm definitely going to share that with you guys. Along with just little things that I do whilst doing this technique to keep my work nice and neat. So first you want to go ahead and pick a pixel grid. I'm going to link the one that I'm using for this video down below if you'd like to go ahead and follow that. If you don't want to follow this grid, that's totally fine. You'll just want to pick a grid that's not too complex. So anything that's kind of just blocks of colour and there's no intricate patterns, that's going to be the best way to learn this technique. Once you have your pixel grid and you've picked out some yarn, we're ready to start this technique. This tutorial is going to be a little bit longer, so definitely grab yourself a snack or a cup of tea or a drink, whatever you like, and sit down and enjoy this video. Our first step is we want to prep our yarn and pick our hook size.
Our first step is going to be to ball up the yarn into smaller skeins. Not gonna lie, as an English person I hate saying skeins, it doesn't sound right. You could keep your main ball of yarn separate and do this as you go, or you can do what I'm gonna do and count how many skeins you'll need for this specific project. To do this, for each colour you want to find which line has the most colour changes. So for the red there is just one lump of colour, but as you can see for the black and white, the row that has the most colour changes has 5 sections that are white and 4 sections that are black. This means that we need 4 balls of black yarn and 5 balls of white yarn, and obviously we just need that one skein of red. When it comes to hook size, you could go ahead and use the hook size that your yarn recommends, but because this technique doesn't have any yarn that you're trying to hide or carry through, you could really make this with any hook size and it will look good. So for me, I used a 4.5mm hook just because I wanted it to be a little bit sheer, and obviously that's not going to affect the final result because I'm not trying to hide any yarn that's being carried through. If you want to determine how big the grid is going to be once you've completed it, you want to start off by making a sample swatch of 10 by 10 single crochets. So what I would do is I would chain 11 and then do 10 rows of 10 single crochets. Once you've completed this size gauge, you want to measure the total height and width of the panel. If you want this measurement to be accurate, I would go ahead and block this sample swatch, but for me I just want an estimate. Once you have the height and the width, you want to go ahead and divide both numbers by 10. Now get your answer for both of these equations and times it by the amount of square boxes on the width and height of the pixel grid. So for me that was 27 and 28 respectively. As I said earlier, I didn't block my sample swatch, so this was an estimate, but as you can see it's still quite a good estimate on how big the final pixel grid will end up once you've crocheted it. If you want to increase or decrease the size of this panel, you'll either need to increase the size of your yarn and hook or the size of the graph, or decrease those.
Now we've got everything ready, we're going to go ahead and start crocheting.
So this tutorial is mainly intended to show you how to make two good sides rather than to teach you how to graphic crochet, but I'll quickly go over how to do this just in case you guys need a quick reminder. But if you want to go ahead and check out some more content on how to do this, I would go ahead and check out the first video I made. Our first step is going to be to chain the amount of boxes across +1, so for me that's going to be 28. Then we want to skip the chain that's closest to the hook, and into that second chain away from the hook we're going to do our first single crochet. And as you can see in this chart, the first row is just going to be in this white colour, so I'm just going to go ahead and do 1 single crochet into each stitch, and this is going to count as our first row. I don't like to use turning chains and single crochet, so I just turn my work and continue, and as you can see for the second row I've got 13 white stitches before I then need to change my colour into red. Remember, whilst reading any pixel grid, you want to make sure that you're changing the direction that you're following the grid each time you move up a row. So the first row, if you went from right to left, your next row is going to be from left to right because you turn your panel each time you start a new row. But as you can see, we have 13 stitches to do before we get to our first colour change, so you want to go ahead and do 12 stitches. And once you reach your final single crochet, you want to put your hook in and pull up a loop, and then get your skein of yarn and put it to the right of you. Now, this is going to be how we add our colours in. What we're going to do is we'll start off with a slip knot, and as you can see the next colour is red, so I'm going to do this with my red colour. You just want to tighten that slip knot and pull it through before you then start your stitch. And as you can see, what we do to change colours is on our final stitch in that colour, that's when we introduce our new colour. So there's just going to be one square, so for this stitch all we're going to do is pull up a loop and then carry on with our white. We then want to place the skein to the right, create a slip knot in a different skein of white yarn and pull that through. And this is going to be what creates the fact that there are no strings running through, is we're not going to carry that white from the right side of the panel over to the left. And anytime we introduce a new colour from now on, we're going to use that exact same technique that I've shown you before. So we've learned how to introduce colours and kind of the general idea of this technique. We can now speed it up a little bit, and I can go into some tips and tricks on how to make this technique work. Now for this next tip, I want us to forget that we're crocheting to have two good sides, because we're still technically going to have a good and bad side. As you can see, I put all of my ends onto one side. This is going to be the side that I would consider to be my bad side. This means that all of my ends that I sew in are going to be on this side, as well as I'm going to keep the yarn on this side just to keep the good side a little bit neater. So when I'm ready to change my yarn, I'm going to bring my yarn towards me underneath my hook and back round like that, before I then get my new colour and pick it up. This means that the yarn that we leave is going to stay on this bad side. We can see also on this bad side where the red has been brought up, but for the moment we're not going to worry about that because we're not moving our kind of areas of colour left to right. We'll deal with that later, so we're just going to do a single crochet like we normally would, just making sure that before we change our colour back to white that we're bringing that red yarn towards us and round our hook. Now remember, we're only going to be doing this when we're on our bad side, and for me I kind of keep track of my bad side by keeping all of my ends on the bad side. So when we turn our work, you can see that this is my good side because there are no ends and all of my yarn is coming from the back of my project. So when it comes to colour changing, I can simply just do the final single crochet, pick up the yarn from the back or the bad side, and then complete the pattern. So at this point we've learned kind of the general principle of how to do this technique, as well as how to change colours both on our quote-unquote good and bad side. Now before we add too many skeins, I'm going to teach you how to turn your work without tangling your yarn. So you can see I brought my left side towards me and to the right, and I kind of maneuver my hook so the yarn goes around my work and behind the hook. And I'm just going to go ahead and continue as normal. I'm on my bad side, so I need to remember that before I do my colour change, I'm going to get my yarn. So actually I'll show you here. I'll pull up a loop and I'm about to colour change, so I bring my yarn towards me around and below my hook before then continuing on. You can see here that my strings are crossed over, but they're staying in the same order, so they shouldn't be tangled at the moment. They might just look a little bit messy, but now you should be able to get your work and turn it the other way. So just like that, I brought my right side towards me to the left and my strings are no longer tangled. The mix of doing this and making sure you're not twisting your piece of work while you're turning your work, as well as the placement of your string on your good and bad side, should ensure that no matter how many skeins of yarn you add to your project, there actually shouldn't be any tangling. At this point, hopefully you're a little bit more used to the technique, so I'm finally going to introduce how to move your colours from left to right. So as you can see in this row, I need to add an extra stitch of red, and what I'm going to do is the string that's coming out of the white panel, I'm going to include over my hook with the two front and back loops of the stitch that I'm entering. And then I can just continue as normal, and us crocheting around this piece of yarn should ensure that everything is hidden and neat even on the bad side. So as you can see, you can't actually see that yarn being carried through very much. And this is going to be the same both on the good and bad side. So here I have to increase the red one stitch either side. So I'm going to colour change the stitch before I need to, and the yarn that I've just brought through there, I want to make sure that that's over my hook along with the front and back loop whilst I complete my single crochet. Now we can complete our single crochets going along, and in the red stitches we don't have anything to cover, but in this white stitch I want to cover that piece of yarn there, so again I make sure that my hook goes underneath it. And then because we're on our bad side, we're going to bring that loop around and towards us before we then continue with our crocheting in that white colour. And again, make sure when you're turning your work, you're turning it back and forth and you're not twisting your panel. If you're having struggles trying not to knot everything, then I would make sure that you're doing everything on a flat surface. That normally helps me. But again, you can see I'm adding 2 stitches of red to this side, so I'm going to make sure that I leave enough yarn that it's not going to tighten that area of my work. Then I can complete those 2 single crochets into the white area of this panel and include the red that I carried through in that as well. And you just basically want to continue this going up. As you can see, I've kind of designed this so the start is quite easy, so you can build up your skills before we then get into adding a lot more colours and kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it all, if you will. So we are now 12 rows into our pattern, and on our 13th row we have to add in a black, but it's going to be on our bad side, so I'm actually going to go ahead and swap around my yarn so they're all untangled, so I can then place this yarn in the mix of it all. With this technique, when it comes to not tangling your yarns, it doesn't matter whether your yarns are crossed over on your good or your bad side, but my personal tip is when you add in a new skein of yarn, you probably want to untangle it so it's not crossed over, which to be fair only takes a few seconds, it doesn't take long. And that just means that you can add it back in without it creating a knot, and then you can turn your work and it's going to be included in that kind of array of strings. For me, out of habit, I normally keep things untangled on my good side, so I'm actually going to go ahead and turn my work and resort out my yarn to do that, but I just wanted to let you guys know that you didn't necessarily need to do that. This is just something that I like because I'm the kind of person that, like, once I do something once and I like it, I'm going to do it that way and I'm never going to do it another way. We're now going to skip to row 15 because that's going to be where our red finishes, and I'll show you how to cast off your skeins. So we're going to complete everything as normal. As you can see, we only have 1 square of red to do, so I'll go ahead and pull up a loop, and this time instead of pulling through a loop with just black, we're going to pull through both the new colour and the colour we're casting off. So I'll pull through the black colour as well as the red. We're going to start by cutting that red yarn, and then I'm going to get that loop of red that I pulled through and take that off of my hook. Then to create a knot, I'm just going to get the end and pull that through the loop and tighten it. This has always been my preferred method when it comes to casting off colours for graphic crochet, but that's my personal preference. You can play around with different things if this isn't for you. But once we've done that, we can just continue crocheting as we normally would, continuing with all the tips and tricks that I've already shared with you. And throughout these next few rows we have quite a lot of skeins to add, but I feel like I've been through how to add colours quite a lot already. But basically it's literally just any time in a row a colour appears that wasn't in the row below. So I'll kind of highlight on the image all the separate parts of the eye and what kind of skein I used. But I did want to mention before I end this video that when you cast off a colour that's in a colour already, it might look a little bit different. So for example, for this pupil, I'm adding this white yarn to create the centre, as well as an extra skein of black for the other side, as I'm not carrying the black from my right side to the left. And in the next row up, when we want to cast off the white, I also want to cast off the black yarn before, because the black yarn on the left of the project at the moment will become the black yarn for the whole iris, if that makes sense. So you want to consider that sometimes you might have to cast off a colour because it won't be needed anymore, but it would still be represented in the grid. So it's not like there's a colour change from that black, but we won't be using that black yarn anymore because there's black yarn on the other side. So hopefully you can see here, we didn't need that other black yarn because I'm carrying that black yarn over the white yarn. So we'll be using the black yarn for both sides now, so we won't need two skeins for the middle of the eye. But basically you just want to continue following the grid pattern, working your way up, continuing to follow all of the tips and tricks that I've shared in this video, and by the end you should just have a piece that has no strings running through but has a good side and a side with a bunch of ends. Now, the more complex your grid pattern is, the more ends you'll have, but really you can just sew in the ends how you like. For me, I just like to keep the colours within the borders of the colours, just to keep everything nice and neat, trying to hide the yarn end as much as I can. Also, when it comes to sewing in ends, you want to make sure when you're going back and forth, you're not only going through the stitches that you made, but the yarn that you've already put through the stitches. This will just make sure that everything's nice and secure. When I first started crocheting, I used to sew in ends just kind of really prettily, and I'd make sure that everything just went through normally and everything would just come undone in the wash, and obviously we don't want that to happen. But once you've finished sewing in your ends, your panel is finally done.
Thank you guys for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. Obviously, if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. Also, make sure you like this video and that you're subscribed to make sure that you're getting my content that comes out now every Monday. I've been so consistent, so I'm finally happy to say that I do have videos out every Monday. I'm also going to leave my Etsy linked in the description below, which does actually include some pixel grids. These definitely aren't super beginner friendly, but if you've been graphic crocheting for a while, you will be more than fine with these. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will see you later. Bye.